Okay, this is one of the thematic units for the American West course. Now, this should be one of 6 videos in which you will look at different themes of this American West unit to be able to apply your knowledge to your consequence questions, your narrative account questions, and your importance questions. So, the focus of today's thematic, the theme, is going to be lawlessness. Now, this video is going to look at different reasons for lawlessness, but also look at the way in which America unsuccessfully dealt with different aspects of crime. So this is just an overview of the course. So you've got your different themes here, and obviously this is something to refer to when doing your revision, which is really important to be able to identify the narrative, but more importantly, to look at the different links between this course throughout this period. So when we look at lawlessness, we're going to look at a range of things. So firstly, we're going to look at the impact of mining towns, look at the impact of the Civil War, look at the consequences of cow towns and also ranches. If you get any question in the exam on consequences, the chance is lawlessness can come up. You just need to be able to identify which type of lawlessness links to the question in which you're asking. So first thing we need to look at is mining towns, lawlessness, and the impact of the American Civil War, 1835 to 1862. So one of the biggest impacts on lawlessness had to have been the gold rush. So the gold rush, there was many gold rushes during this time, but one of the most important ones was the California gold rush. It was a turning point in lawlessness. The reason for that is because the population of California jumped so significantly in such a short space of time, going from 8,000 in 1846 to 300,000 by 1855. Law enforcement didn't have the infrastructure to be able to deal with this. And as a result, it led to further lawlessness. So if you've got a question on the consequences or the importance of the gold rush too, this is really important to develop. Now, what type of camps? So you had prospectors who were the people that were mining gold. It says there, gold prospectors gathered in camps whenever gold was found. People moved quickly because the gold didn't last. Camps grew up in days from nothing to huge cities, boom towns. People moved to create boom towns. And there's still a case in America today where these boom towns are left deserted because they were only useful for as long as the gold was there. It was too rapid for law to be introduced. Mining camps had a law about staking a claim, which said the amount of land that a prospector could have and gave them rights to any gold they found there. But claim jumping was common, which meant other people tried to steal it. Something else that was common was something called salting a claim. And that basically means that people would sprinkle a small amount of gold, make someone think that there was gold, and then sell it for a good price. But basically, it was a con. Mining camps, so those areas that were set up quickly, also had prostitutes and people that were basically drinking excessive amounts because there was nothing else to do. It led to drunken fights between the men who basically formed attachments to the women that they'd basically been paying for. And then the key thing, prospectors came from all over the world. Mining camps had such a different mix of people from different religions and cultures. For example, the Chinese migrants. It's a key example in this part of the course. If you want, you can use those questions. For each of these slides, you could pause it and answer the questions that are on the side. So again, further on from the gold rush, we're just going to develop a little bit deeper into the gangs and the racial aspect, which I mentioned on the last slide. So as we said, California grew significantly. So just by 1849, from 1,000 to 25,000, by 300,000 in 1855. But there were issues. The prospectors could not find gold. So it led to further issues for those people. So by the 1850s, many prospectors didn't have anything, and they'd worked their claim. So they ultimately ran out of any opportunity to find gold. There was a development of professional miners going underground, meaning that the original prospectors didn't have the skills or money to mine. So they got jobs with new mining companies. So mining companies hired people with skills that could go underground. It developed the gold mining industry. Chinese migration occurred. There was a famine in which people were then moving to America under the credit ticket system. 20,000 of the California population was Chinese. However, these Chinese miners were prevented from working new claims and given old pieces of land, and there were regular attacks. And gangs were created and took control of areas. The law couldn't deal with gangs, so they walked in saloons, into pubs, shot people, stole their money, and left. It was a lawless environment because there was no law and order to deal with it. So how did they try and deal with it? Mining communities actually wrote down laws. Communities created their own laws with a judge, their own court, but the judge was a respected member of the community. So it was basically like little mining towns had their own set of rules. They weren't consistent. You had vigilance committees that were corrupt. So you'd capture the suspect yourself, try them yourself, and punish them yourself. So it was basically them trying to take the law into their own hands, which meant that at times violence would occur. And the law in most of the mining communities did discriminate against Chinese workers. So moving on to the next slide. Just going to get rid of this. If you want to answer those questions, please do. Just pause the video. The next thing we're going to focus on is how did they try to tackle crime? Now, the key thing here in this period is attempts. So territories of the West were under control of the federal government, the main government. It became a state when it had 60,000 people. So if you get a state, you can actually have your own government, laws, and legal system. You're no longer under the control of the federal government. So you need to consider here the growth of population led to different areas. Even in America today, different states have different approaches to laws. If an area wasn't a state, then the government would appoint a governor for the territory, 3 judges, and a US Marshal. Realistically, was that enough? No. America was far too vast with a small-scale system. And then if a territory got 5,000 people, communities could elect a sheriff. But they had no legal training. Sheriffs mainly possibly did it to be corrupt. There were very few sheriffs that actually did it for the correct reasons. Big problems. America's huge. Areas were hard to control. The railroad hadn't been set up yet. News would take ages to reach officers. The government didn't pay enough for legal training. And as I just said, sheriffs could be corrupt as they had no legal training. So as we get to the end of this unit, the Civil War happens. Now, how did the Civil War cause lawlessness? So the Civil War, basically, as we know, was the war between the North and the South. The Civil War added more trouble to the West because soldiers who ran away from the army and because of ex-soldiers after the war. So you had deserters and people who didn't have a job following the war. Now, lots of the Civil War soldiers did go into lawlessness because there was no other option. So gangs of outlaws were usually made up of soldiers who had fought in the Civil War and were too traumatized by the war and unable to find work. So if you got a question, explain 2 consequences of the Civil War, then that's what you've got. Okay, you've got lawlessness. Outlaws who were part of the losing side, the Confederacy, and felt anger towards the government were trying to get revenge. These gangs terrified people into doing everything they said. They were nasty people who had massive influence due to the amount of violence they showed. The Reno Gang were the most famous group. So in 1866, they carried out numerous train robberies. So they got $16,000. They committed 4 train robberies, with the 4th one netting $96,000. Now, this group here were basically your main outlaws. It was as a consequence of the Civil War. The Pinkerton Detective Agency used the information. They were a group that was set up to be able to basically install more impactful law and order, and they actually found the majority of the Reno Gang. However, it does say this: the 4 other members of the Reno Gang were caught by a vigilance committee and lynched. So it still shows that there were some significant gaps and significant problems with how law and order was dealt with. So the next part of this course is looking at the impact of the railroad. Again, if you've got a consequence question on this in the exam, you need to be talking about the impact, the consequence, the importance. All this exam paper talks about is what things led to. So know your knowledge, but know what it led to. So why did the railroad cause issues? So the railroad was also known as hell on wheels because of the amount of lawlessness it caused. The most lawless towns were cow towns, which, as we know, cowboys were incredibly lawless, and one of the main examples was Abilene. So the railroad allowed people to travel further. Railroad allowed people to travel quicker. And if you were breaking the law, that also could have an impact. Cowboys, when they go to these cow towns, spent money on drinking, gambling, and it led to massive trouble. So Abilene, as an example, it was in Kansas. Its population boomed following the development of Abilene by Joseph McCoy, and lawlessness increased because of this. The more people, the more crime. Cowboys had gunfights, committed murder. Their payday celebration brought more saloons and brothels to the town. People saw it as an opportunity, if these boom towns were set up, to be able to make money. And when Abilene built a jail in 1870, the cowboys tore it down. It shows you how ineffective lawlessness was. In 1870, the town's leader in Abilene hired Thomas Smith. He issued a ban on carrying guns, and he used his boxing skills to knock out cowboys. He was shot dead. And then in April 1871, you had a man called Wild Bill Hickok, who was appointed town marshal. He commanded respect, but he didn't do much to sort the law out. He was sacked, and eventually cowboys were banned from taking their cows to Abilene by 1871. And remember, this is when ranching became a lot more significant because of the beef bonanza in the 1870s. And then we've got the final part of the course. So Law and Order 1876 to 1885. Now, to be perfectly honest, at this stage, lawlessness still was not dealt with. And I guess you can argue during this whole course that lawlessness wasn't dealt with. And Billy the Kid, Wyatt Earp, and the Johnson County War show that because of influence and because of key people, it was never going to get fully sorted. So why was there lawlessness? So you had conflict between ranchers and homesteaders because of the land. You had conflict between people of different races. You had settlements that were electing sheriffs and other lawmen to stop violence, but the justice system was also influenced by conflict and tension too. So why did people commit crime? Stealing, conflict over land, gangs who were feared, people sorting out their own problems, the law of the West, where you take self-defense killing was okay by law, corrupt sheriffs, and obviously the vigilantes. So a few examples that you do need to be made aware of is firstly, Billy the Kid. So Billy the Kid, he grew up in mining camps. He would have seen law. He committed crime. He stole cows and he stole horses. He took part in something called the Lincoln County War, helping a cattle baron against a rancher who wanted more land. Now, during this war, Billy lost a friend and he decided to take revenge on anyone who was responsible. So basically, Billy the Kid became this individual who took the law into his own hands, and it showed that even in the later parts of this course, that lawlessness was not fully stable. It wasn't dealt with. He was standing up to people who he believed were responsible for his friend's murder. But as a result, he still showed that lawlessness was ineffective. Law and order was ineffective. So cattle ranchers appealed for someone to stop Billy the Kid, and Pat Garrett was appointed the sheriff. Garrett tracked Billy down, captured him, brought him to court. The judge sentenced him to death. Billy escaped, was tracked down again, and shot dead. Now, for a lot of people, Billy the Kid was seen as exciting because he stood up to the rich people. And ultimately, poorer people liked Billy the Kid. But it also showed that the justice system in Lincoln County was too weak. Garrett said he knew he would have to kill the kid. So it showed that Billy the Kid, the law and order was still massively ineffective, because how did they deal with it? They killed him. So that was, again, another reason to show why lawlessness was ineffective at this stage of this course. Then you've got Wyatt Earp and the shootout at the OK Corral. So in cowtowns, cowboys spent their money on drinking, dancing, gambling, and prostitutes. We know this. Now, Wyatt Earp was appointed to try and deal with this. So Earp got involved in law enforcement. He helped deputy marshal of an area called Wichita to deal with a rowdy group of cowboys. He was offered the job permanently. In 1879, he moved to a place called Tombstone, which was a boom town created by rich mining owners and businessmen who had opposition from ranchers, the Clantons and McClorys. So the rich businessman hired Earp to be deputy sheriff. There were clashes between Earps and the Clantons and the McClorys. Cowboys caused serious problems and rumours spread that the Earps had been involved. So basically, it's another example where rich people were trying to control the law and order by appointing Wyatt Earp. In 1881, the Earps shot dead McClory and Clanton. Claims they were trying to disarm the town people did not believe it. So it shows again, people in power took advantage of their position. Cowboys shot 2 of the Earp brothers dead in 1882. Wyatt Earp shot 2 of the men who were responsible. So people turned on the Earps due to their violence, and Wyatt was forced to flee Tombstone. It just shows that even when people were trying to be appointed as someone who was trying to deal with law and order, that the temptation of being swayed by the rich individuals was still there. But you could argue that as a result of the Earps, lawlessness did go down because of the banning of guns after Wyatt Earp fled. And then the last slide is the Johnson County War. Now, this could be quite a popular topic for the exam board, especially the narrative account question. So the Johnson County War was an argument over ranches, land, everything along those lines, but more importantly showed the influence of rich people, once again, taking advantage of poorer people who were trying to achieve manifest destiny under the Homestead Act. So Wyoming's the key place for this. Cattle barons were very important. So they had their own association called the WGSA to protect their interests. Now, what we need to understand is that cattle barons lost a lot of power after the Great Dire, when 15% of the cattle industry died. Those that were small ranchers did better, and this upset the cattle barons. So rustling had been a problem for Wyoming for years, but now the cattle barons were struggling. They wanted to put a stop to it. Now, ultimately, this started because the previous barons who were very powerful had lost their power, and they were probably trying to recoup some. And as a result, these small ranchers basically faced the wrath of the old rich ranchers. So in 1889, small ranch owners Jim Averill and Ella Watson were living on land that a cattle baron called Albert Bothwell wanted. Averill wrote a letter to the newspaper accusing Bothwell of being a land grabber. Then Bothwell accused Ella Watson of rustling. Bothwell's men caught them and they hanged both Averill and Watson, took their land and cattle. No one was prosecuted for these murders. So what does that show about the rich? Then what happened was the old barons planned to invade Johnson County to kill 70 men. They raised $100,000 to do this. But people of Wyoming fought back because Nate Champion held off the invaders and gave Sheriff Angus of Johnson County time to raise a force to fight back. Invaders got away with it, though, as the WSGA had more money than Johnson County, so the trial had to be dropped. So this was all about trying to get the land back, trying to build up their momentum and power previously. 2 people were killed unfairly, but it showed the influence of the rich. The original WSGA got away with this because ultimately, regardless of law and order, at this stage, if you had the money to be able to appoint lawyers, the chances you would win the majority of the time because the people that you were going against didn't have the money to fight back. So that's your video on the different lawlessness and law and order and the reasons for lawlessness increasing in this time period.